Hello, everyone. I want to talk to you today a little bit around privacy concerns and wearable technologies. For the agenda today, I will talk about an introduction just to what do I mean by wearable devices. We'll then look at some privacy issues, specifically around health data, data and third parties, who owns the data, and public by default. And I'll let you know what I mean by that. Also look at regulations, if there are any regulations in the United States, and then we'll conclude. So wearable technologies, I think most of us know what wearable technologies are, but I'm gonna break them down a little bit here. What I mean by wearable technologies, something like Apple Watch, Android wearable, Samsung Watch, activity trackers. That's usually the heaviest percentage of wearable technologies fall in activity trackers, Fitbit, Garmin, etc. Coming along more and more, we have healthcare devices. I've seen blood glucose monitors, I've seen things around heart. So that's definitely a rising piece to wearable technologies. I have smart glasses on here, and I kind of lumped in virtual reality, and I have Google Glass. I'm sure some of us remember Google Glass. That really was a great big failure in the consumer part of that. And then this graph to the left, it just shows us a little bit. This was actually done in 2017, so a little bit older data, but um, it's definitely been on the rise. It's showing where 33% um, of the wearable technology falls into the activity trackers, 25% in smartwatches. We're seeing more and more smartwatches become available. Um, Here I have, it has smart glasses at 10%. And again, there are still smart glasses being made. They're more for the business instead of the consumer. And then medical devices, which brings up 7%. But this is definitely on the rise. Wearable technologies is a tremendous business. And I pulled some stats here just so you could kind of get an idea. The one on the left, the graph on the left, um, and then the line on the left, on the graph on the left shows revenue. And as you can tell, it's a $1 billion industry, and it's continued to rise. This goes out. It's a forecast goes out to 2026, and expected to be over $150 billion industry with a number of units sold up around the $9 billion for wearable technology. The graph on the right is forecast unit shipments of wearable devices. Goes from 2017, 2019, and then to 2022, so a future. And it's kind of broken down into smartwatches, wristbands, ear worn, smart clothing. But you can take a look again. It's just millions and millions of units. So what are some privacy concerns? And they're more than just the ones I'm sharing here today, but I wanted to at least go over what was a very big concern to me. And as we get more and more health data or health wearables in the future, the number one thing that's got to come up is the PHI, or patient health information, that's shared with physicians and hospitals. It's a very important that you know where your data is being stored and what's being done with it. You know, most of the time your data is going to be stored uh, locally, and it's just usually interface with your electronic medical record. So it's good to ask those questions. And then another question around your PHI, how's it being safeguarded? Is it stored on site, local in a data center, or is it being hosted off-site somewhere else? And what are their parameters around safeguarding that data? Is the data encrypted? You as the consumer or patient, it's your right to know what's happening to your data, so you must ask those questions. And everybody's heard of HIPAA, hospitals. So it's always important to know, if the medical facility or physician's office, does it fall under the covered entity, and does HIPAA apply? Because HIPAA is in place to protect you or your data as a patient. So again, ask all the questions. This is probably, when it comes to health wearables, this is the number one priority for you as a patient, to understand where your data's at. My next point here is data and third parties. And this is the one that the majority of us most likely never read the fine print from the wearable maker. Um, and if you read the fine print, you'll find a lot of times that most wearable makers will share and sell your data. It's a common thing they do for making money. It's very important to understand. Also, these companies, the majority of them do not fall under HIPAA. Um, they're not covered entities under the law of HIPAA. So they do sell your data. And if you read the fine print, most agreements state in there that, or there's a sentence in there that we may share your data. Well, we may share your data equals that we're going to share your data. So make sure you go and read all the privacy policies of the wearable maker. And let me say, not all are created equal. You have some that are much better at protecting your data than others. And I found this pretty neat link here, website, where you have basically some legal people that actually go and make sense out of the most popular agreements by wearable manufacturers. So, if you want to look up Apple, or you want to look up Fitbit, or you want to look up Garmin, go to this site right here, and it'll kind of give you a breakdown of the good and bad uh, when it comes to the privacy agreements from each maker. My next point is, who actually owns your data, especially when it comes to wearable manufacturers. And I'll be honest, I have not been able to find a clear, definable answer around this. What I can say is regulations for definite need to be added and legislated to protect the consumer. There's not a lot out there that really shows who owns this data. I mean, as a consumer, you think, okay, well, it's my data. I'm offering up this data, I'm sharing this data, but I own it. That's not always the case. So, again, find out and read the fine print. Um, and I put on here too, Europe has a better regulation because of GDRP or GDPR, excuse me. Um, and with them having that, it does protect your data a little more and the consumer. United States is lacking far behind. My last point here is public by default. And this can certainly help you if you know what to look for. Most people, they put the wearable device on, whether it's a watch or a fitness tracker. And by default, most of these devices automatically share data through a social networking site, for instance, Facebook, or it could be another. Um, but this is something that a consumer can control. So you should always look at all your privacy settings around that device and make sure they aren't set to public by default. This is something you can do and you can turn off. That way you're not, sharing publicly your information, whether that's heart rate, whether that's sleep data, or what have you. and it's not going out there for, say, all your friends and anybody else that can see your Facebook page and have access to your data. So that's something consumers certainly can do, and it does help out when it comes to privacy. So I wanted to kind of end the conversation around here. Next couple slides talking about regulations, specifically the United States. And again, we've hit on HIPAA. And again, this individual rights for their health information, but it gives limited protection for data harvested by wearable companies. And we talked a little bit that in the previous slide. These companies, specifically wearable manufacturers, are treated as non-covered entities defined by the scope of HIPAA. So they don't have uh, your rights when it comes to privacy in mind, and they're not regulated by HIPAA. So as I started looking, I found a few more um, government agencies that have or kind of touch on briefly wearable devices or some faction of that, but not really. So FDA is one of them. It protects consumers against unlawful medical devices, a device that is intended for medical purposes. The FDA doesn't clarify or classify a wearable device as a medical device. So FDA will not set privacy standards around consumable wearables. So they have something in place for medical devices only. The one that does bring some protection when it comes to wearable devices is the Federal Trade Commission. This agency does protect consumers against companies that don't comply with their own privacy policies. So it brings legal action against organizations that have violated consumers' privacy rights. So it does look at companies that actually don't comply with their own privacy policies. So that's why it's important for you to know the privacy policy of your wearable manufacturers in order to know whether they've broken that private policy or not. So in conclusion, I just wanted to say that wearable technologies, it's $1 billion industry. That's why you see more and more, and you will continue to see more and more. Consumers should be aware of privacy agreements. Please read all your privacy agreements for all wearable technology. And wearable technologies are a great benefit to consumers, but privacy should never be jeopardized. Manufacturers should take necessary precautions to protect consumers' privacy and hold them accountable to that. And the last point here is legislators should catch up on the pace to regulate both personal and business use of wearable devices to eliminate risk of privacy violations. With this becoming a more and more our larger industry in the coming years, it's time for legislators to step up and protect the consumer. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation today, and I appreciate you listening. The last slide is just some references that I used in putting together this slide. I hope you enjoyed and have a great day. Thank you.